everyone, it's Christy from Green Eyed Tarot, and today I'm here to film a video about the way I specifically use tarot and study and explore tarot cards, because I've realized it really has evolved from when I first started reading, which was many years ago, and like when I first started studying, and it now has evolved into something really different. And so I've realized that I typically gravitate towards decks that are very illustrated, that are very narrative in their artwork and in their themes. And so I think we're going to call this Narrating the Tarot, or tarot narratives, or whatever you want to call it. Storytelling, journeying. I'm shying away from using pathworking as a term that relates to the way I use tarot, because pathworking is very specific. It's a very specific practice. It's actually a Kabbalistic practice that's sort of related to the tree of life and walking the paths of the tree of life using the tarot cards, because each major arcana card relates to a branch of the tree of life. So it's a very specific Kabbalistic practice that relates to like the Golden Dawn and Crowley and Thoth. And I don't read Thoth. I think I've mentioned it before. I've tried, I've gotten some decks that are Thothy. They're not like the Thoth deck, but I don't do pips, and it's mostly because they are not illustrated. Like 4 wands on a card, I sort of know the meaning of a 4 of wands, but for me, it's more in depth than that. And I don't mean to say that you cannot go in depth with a Thoth deck, but for me, I get into the cards. So I'm like in the card. I put myself in the card. I see other people in the card. I use those scenes and I make up stories. And that's how I get meaning and understanding from a reading. So it's narrating the tarot. I literally make up an entire story a lot of times in my head. I mean, I give people names. It's in depth and it's involved. And it's just, I've noticed the way that I read tarot. And I don't know if it's because I love reading in general, books, and I have like a love of just reading all different types of books, or I have a love of like stories and fairy tales and storytelling. I just think it sort of bleeds over into the way that I use tarot. And so every reading for me typically becomes a story. So today, it's really just going to be talking about decks that tell a story. So I think I might, maybe even create a tag, hashtag decks that tell a story, because I realized it's like majority of the decks I have in my tarot deck library are these types of decks. Because obviously I gravitate towards decks that are going to be a part of my tarot practice, like ones that I'm going to use, ones that I'm going to be able to read with. So pip decks, it's just never going to happen for me, because I struggle with those, because they don't excite me and I can't tell stories. I'm sure I can make up a story, but it's not as much fun, and I don't get as much enjoyment out of it, and I don't get as much from it. So I think really, this is just, I feel like, going to be a series on my channel about narrating the tarot and how I do it with different decks, and just readings and spreads and things that relate to that, and just what does that really mean, because like I said, pathworking is not really a word I feel like that describes what I'm talking about, because I feel like that's something totally separate, not guided meditation, not astral projection necessarily, although there's some like journeying that goes with it, but this is different. And so today I just want to talk about the decks that tell a story in my collection, and why I love them so much, and kind of how they work in my practice with tarot cards. So yeah, I'm going to flip the camera around. I'm just going to start talking about some decks that tell a story. before I start showing cards, one more thing I forgot to mention, just a thought I'm having, is just how, for me, tarot is more than just an esoteric tool. That's a part of it, and I know so many people who use like the symbols and the esoterics of tarot, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I feel like a lot of it, I feel like so much of tarot was designed to be used in that way. So I'm not saying it's invalid. It's far from that. It's just me personally, the way I approach tarot. And that there's a lot to be said for intuition. And when you're looking at these narrated scenes, these very illustrated scenes, for me, it really kickstarts my intuition. And it really, narrating the tarot for me helps build my intuition, because I'm taking it and taking the cohesiveness of the cards and binding them together into a story that makes sense for me, and that then I can get meaning from. So just a point to make that the esoterics, I'm not what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not discounting the esoteric symbols in tarot in any way, shape, or form. It's just, for me, this is a big way that I use tarot, and how I relate to it, and how it's part of my practice. And I came across this great quote. It's from LearnTarot.com, which is a website that someone created, like a free course in learning tarot. And I used to access it and use it all the time, and I still go back to it every once in a while. And the quote is, "Your tarot realizations are always the right ones for you at a given time and place." And I just sort of love that, because it does make tarot personal, and it does, make it so that there's no wrong way for you to read the tarot. And I don't mean the meanings. Yes, the cards have general meanings, but I feel what you can take away from them and how you can apply them to your life, or a client reading, or whatever way you're using tarot, there's really no wrong way to use them in your own practice. Like, it's for you. It should be personalized, and it should really be however you want to interact with those cards. And for me, it definitely is that jumping into them and creating a story, and almost like a world. Each deck is a world of its own. And so I just wanted to add that little quote and those little thoughts that I had. But now let's get to the cards, because I know that's what everyone is really interested in. Hi everyone again. So here we are with decks that tell a story, and I understand and realize that, like, I guess any tarot deck can tell a story. It's really based on whoever's using it. But for me, these decks are really have that story feeling. Like, just by looking at them, you see that there's a story being told. So basically, that's what these decks mean to me. They are truly decks that tell a story because of the artwork, or the illustration, or the theme of the deck, or the guidebook, the way it's written. Although with this type of storytelling, narrating the tarot, I prefer to use my intuition and come up with my own stories. So I tend to shy away from the guidebooks, like, once I've read them and once I've kind of gotten what I can from them, I like to sort of just put my own spin on it. And so I refrain from using the guidebooks for a lot of these decks. So the first deck is the Forest of Enchantment Tarot. Really no surprise. If anyone was trying to guess the decks that I was going to be talking about, I bet many of you would have guessed that this deck would definitely be on the list. So the Forest of Enchantment Tarot, like, look at the backs. The backs, like, literally scream storybook. The name of the deck screams storybook. So this deck is, it's beautiful. It's magical. The Forest of Enchantment. So, right away you're sort of in that mindset. For me, at least, you're in that, okay, I'm definitely entering like that storybook type of world. And so the scenes, the artwork on this deck is just delicious. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. Marayla Allwood is the artist. Linnea Weatherstone, who's amazing and writes amazing guidebooks. The guidebook is amazing, and it reads like a storybook, so you definitely should read it cover to cover if you like that, you know, type of thing. Because it does read like a storybook, but of course this deck is sort of like a storybook in a deck. And I can say that about a lot of the decks that I'm going to talk about. But these cards are just so expressive, and there's so many different people and situations and scenes and animals, and so it really helps the mind wander, and really allows you to sort of tap into that intuitive storytelling. We'll call it intuitive storytelling, where you're literally just kind of like letting the scene take you. So you're also using the card. So this is the wide world. So this is the world. You're using the card and what you know about it, your knowledge. So this is fulfillment, you know, the completion, the end. We know this is the end of the Fool's Journey, but the Fool's Journey never really ends. So maybe that's where we're going with it. I mean, the buck that led you into the this beautiful white stag that led you into the forest is now leading you out, but there's another like winding path that goes all the way. So you're about to embark on another journey. So there's so many stories that you could tell about this. What's the next journey? Where is it going to? You know, there's so much you can get just from beyond the meaning of the card that we know the world. I love this. The Ace of Boons. Oh my God. So this is the Ace of Pentacles in this deck, but like it's a little frog and he's got this ring. Now to me, it would be like this little frog has this magic ring because it's sparkling, you know, and maybe he's imbued it with a spell. So we know the Ace of Pentacles is, you know, sort of like that grounding, you know, that spark of really grounded, earthy energy. So maybe he's imbuing all that into the magical ring he's making, and he's going to give it to whatever card we pull next in the deck. Oh, he's going to give it to the Child of Spells. And so like if you're pulling these in succession and now you're creating a story narrative that once you complete that story narrative, you can get so much meaning out of it and apply it to the reading, you know, whoever you're reading for, yourself, you know, for whatever the situation. Look at this. Look at him. Like there's so much that you can get from him, and just from this card and his facial expression and his size and what he's holding in his hand. He's ripped a tree out of the ground, so he's obviously a giant. So definitely, you know, one of those decks that's just, you know, storybook all the way and has all the elements, you know, just has mythical creatures and magical creatures and people and fairies and animals and giants and dwarves and dancing bears. The Three of Visions. Like, look at, this is the Three of Cups in this deck. I mean, they're bears. Like, they're literally like dancing happy bears, you know, but now you can create a narrative for these fun three bears that are dancing all together. So it's just a magical deck anyway. I mean, it's a beautiful deck. It's one worth studying. It's one worth really like taking a deep dive in. There's some really great YouTube tarot tubers who are doing deep dives of this deck, and I'm going to try to remember to link them below because they're amazing. It's one of those decks you definitely want to get into and deep dive into. All right, next deck, Green Witch Tarot. Very much along the same, in the same vein as the Forest of Enchantment. Has a very similar feel. These are the backs. I'm sure everyone's like very familiar with this deck. But again, it definitely, it's the Green Witch Tarot, so it definitely has a witchy feel. It's got that sort of hedge witch, green witch, obviously type energy, but it also has a storybook feel. There are a lot of narrated scenes, a lot of illustrated, you know, fully illustrated scenes, people, places, animals, herbs, trees. This is the Green Witch deck, so it does you know, incorporate flowers and plants and trees and herbs and things like that. But it's not the main focus of the scene that we're looking at. But it's another added layer. So we're still using the symbolism in the deck. It's just, it's a very illustrated use of symbolism, if that makes sense. But like, look here, this is like this little pixie. You know, the facial expressions are something that, you know, you're definitely going to, you intuitively, you know, try to pinpoint, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they experiencing right now? What's the situation that they're in? That to me is what really helps me get understanding and meaning out of a reading. You know, whether it's 1 card, 3 cards, you know, 9 cards, they tell a story when they're all together. And narrating the tarot, at least for me, and narrating the tarot for you, you know, helps you understand that story and how it relates to what you're looking for, you know, in this spread. So this deck, you know, is wonderful for that. Again, it's like I said, along the same vein as the Forest of Enchantment, but it's magical and it's witchy, so I love it, definitely. I'm going to be drawn to it, but there's just so many opportunities to narrate this deck. You know, whether it's in your mind, that's another thing. Like, you know, you can narrate this in your mind. You can, you know, as you're doing a reading, you can speak it out loud, or you can journal about it. You can literally narrate it in a journal, write it down. You're writing a story. You know, I do that quite a bit. You know, when I journal with the tarot, it comes out like a story. No matter what I try to do, no matter how I try to change it up or study a deck a different way, the readings always come out like a story. They're always written like a story. So, and that's just, like I said, I just find my mind automatically doing that. And it's been really fulfilling and I really love it. And I feel like that's why I just wanted to share this. I wanted to share that with the tarot tube world, because I hope there's other people out there like me and who kind of use tarot in this way and who really love this sort of very illustrated. Oh, look. We get the Page of Pentacles again, but look at this dog. Like animals too. I mean, you can get so much from the animals that are appearing in the decks. That's why I find it so difficult, like, to do this type of work with the tarot when it's like just an animal deck, because I have a hard time now doing this narrating the tarot when it's just animals. Like, I'm sure I could, and I'm sure I could come up with stories for animals, but to me it's like, I don't know, I need a variety of people and creatures and places and things and animals, and in order to be able to use tarot this way. So let's see, the next deck that's sort of along the same vein is the Chrysalis Tarot. So this deck is very unique. It sort of has its own, definitely has its own system. It's not exactly a tarot deck. I feel like you can use this. It has these beautiful backs. They're so vibrant. I feel like you could use this as an oracle as well. But it definitely has a very storybook feel, and it has lots of different characters and you know, different situations. Like, it reminds me of, like, you know, if you were in a storybook and you met like all these different, like, here it says Merlin, you know, so he's the hero, and now you have Ravens, the magician, you know. So I feel like all these the creatures, so here we have the 5 of stones, stones being pentacles in this deck. But we see this fairy and her head's down and she's just sort of despondent. And so again, it's very illustrated and it's expressive, so that narrating this deck to me, you know, will be so much easier because of how, you know, illustrated it is and how expressive, you know, the images are. I love this Hermit card. Look at that Hermit card. This, she's like a crown of crows. So yeah, and like I said, it does kind of have its own, the suits are renamed. It's, it's a lot different than just a traditional tarot deck, but it's still very storybook, very storybook. But it has a lot of different, like almost like different genres of stories and different genres of books. And you're sort of like kind of meeting all of them along this journey. So yeah, so I feel like it's definitely one of those decks that tell a story. Again, the use of animals, this dog. I mean, it's just, I love when there's animals and people, together, because it's just an added layer. Like I said, all animal decks, all people decks, all female decks, all masculine decks, all, it's a little bit tougher to get that storytelling, that narrating feel, because I feel like you need all these different types of people and creatures and animals and places and scenes in order to really, be able to tell a story. So here we have the course there. So like there's a pirate. So we have Merlins, we have a pirate. We have like ones that look like Aladdin, like Arabian Nights. This looks like Pan, or like, the Green Man, or Pan with his little flute. So, I mean, there's so many different, like I said, it's like different genres of stories, Here we have Max. Okay, so this is Egyptian now. It's like, it's very like diverse and has so many different, again, like types of characters, that I feel like it's such a great deck for the way I'm speaking about using tarot, which is like sort of that narrating the tarot. Okay, next up is the Druidcraft Tarot, which is a very specific type of deck, using the magic of Wicca and Druidry, in your tarot deck. So, while this has a very specific theme, to me, because of the way it's illustrated, sort of the world that it's set in, because let's be honest, the world that a deck is set in, that's sometimes what draws us to a deck, or maybe we shy away from using a deck, because of the world it's set in. Like for me, like anything like space theme, like outer space or cosmic, like I tend to not gravitate towards, and that's just me. It's a personal preference. But if, let's say, you're super into science fiction books, I would imagine that if you're going to narrate the tarot and you have a deck that's super science fiction-y and set in like outer space, then that might be a great deck for you to do this sort of storytelling with. So it's really personal. Like it's a very personal, it's a very personal choice. Like when you pick a deck, I know, sure, we do look at walkthroughs and read reviews and all of those things to try to get a better understanding if it's a deck for us. But for me, these types of decks that tell a story are definitely the ones that I gravitate towards, just from looking at my collection and like realizing, yep, that's pretty much like the majority of the decks. I have been getting more into like obscure decks that don't have this narrative, very illustrated feel, which has been kind of cool too. But for this, like my favorite way to use the tarot and the way I usually find myself is by narrating it and through storytelling. So this deck is just a great, again, a great deck filled with, lots of different, people and scenes and, situations that they're in. So maybe when I'm narrating this deck and I'm using it, I am putting more of a Wicca, witchy, druid spin on it, just because that's the theme of the deck. But it's beautiful. I feel like, this deck, everyone, is pretty familiar with this deck. It's been around, for so long. This is like my original copy. It's like I feel like it's one of the earlier copies because I've had this for a very long time. So this might be one of the copies from the 90s. I think it actually is because this is my original. But it's gorgeous. And again, it's very expressive. It's very illustrated. There's a lot that you can use here when you're narrating the tarot, when you're using it in that sort of storytelling aspect. It's definitely one of those that you can feel yourself, at least me, stepping into this card. Like I'm here, I can kind of smell what this would smell like and just like how it would feel, like how the temperature would feel. Just what I would hear, you know, I'm a very senses, that's a big thing for me. So I feel like, you know, I could definitely like imagine. I have a very active imagination. So I guess, you know, talking about imagination would be appropriate here, because I can imagine all of those things. What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? You know, is it cold? You know, is it warm? I mean, just all of those things I can get from the cards. And it's not always easy to have that time to study a deck, you know, like that intently, like to sit and study a deck and each card like that intently. But if you have the time, I feel like it's so rewarding. And I feel like I want to make more time to do that with the decks that I have, because I just feel like I don't spend enough time with decks, you know, and that's a whole nother conversation, and that's a whole nother video. But yeah, just that excessive amount of decks for me is definitely giving me that deck overwhelm, because I really want to dive deep into these decks and get into the cards and really study them and really narrate them and give them their own story. So yeah, so this is definitely one of those. I love this. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck. Just gives me all the fall feels. Look at that. So yeah, so this is a gorgeous deck. I'm like actually just really, I like miss this deck. Holding it in my hand and going through it, I miss it, and now I want to pull it out. And that's the problem, is that it happens with a lot of the decks. Okay, so the last deck that's sort of in that very storybook feel is the John Bauer Tarot. And this one, like I literally recently, like within the last couple weeks, just got this, and I can't believe it took me this long. I absolutely do not like these backs. I kind of understand them, but I don't like them. But that's besides the point. We're not here to talk about the backs. We're here to talk about the fronts, which is the most important thing. So, so this deck is still in order because I'm still kind of getting to know it. I literally just got it, like I said. But this deck is amazing, and I don't even understand why it took me so long to get this deck. Obviously, I've known about this deck for a long time. I've seen it in so many different places, and I cannot believe it took me as long as it did. But I'm so glad that I have it, because this is definitely one of those decks that I can narrate and I can tell a story with. It's got all those grim fairy tale feels, and I absolutely love it. It's a little dark, you know, but it's like very sweet. I just love the artwork, and like I said, there's so much here. Like, look at this. It's like a stone giant. I don't know. There's just so much. This is the fairy tale. This is the fairy tale deck. This is definitely, you know, that storybook world. But like I said, it's a little dark. It's a little Hansel and Gretel. It's Little Red Riding Hood. It's those stories that like can be a little dark. You know, when you look at the actual Grimm's fairy tales, you know, not the juvenile ones, the ones that are made for kids, but the really scary, you know, kind of a little bit disturbing, you know, Grimm's fairy tales. I see that, you know, in this deck a little bit, and I really love it. And I feel like this is going to be really perfect for the way I'm talking about using tarot. Yeah, so I'm really glad that I got it. I think, like I said, it's beautiful. It's expressive. It's definitely, you know, got the storybook feel. It's definitely a deck that tells a story, and I'm really looking forward to kind of diving into it and getting into this world and kind of seeing what I get out of it, because that's really what it's all about, is what you get out of this experience of using tarot and how you use it, and this is just a really, really fun and imaginative and you know, all-encompassing way that I relate to tarot. And yeah, so this deck is fabulous. I'm super excited about it. I'm so glad I have it now, and it definitely is a deck that tells a story. So then this next deck is a little bit more like of a niche sort of deck, not exactly storybook, but definitely very illustrated. So this is the Odins Playbook, a Norse Tarot Tale. This is by Danielle Norman, and this is a really interesting deck. It's definitely Norse themed. There's runes included. I think I've talked about this deck in other videos I've done, but it's a beautiful deck. It's beautifully produced. Can we just talk about those edges? Like, look at that blue. It's like a matte blue, probably one of my favorite edgings on a deck ever. But this deck is really, like I said, really interesting because it's a Viking / Norse type of theme deck. So if that's something that interests you and you wanted to narrate the tarot, but in a Viking / Norse world, but that's almost a little bit modern, then this might be a deck for you. And I did put it in order actually for the purpose of this video, just because this deck has a little bit of a unique structure. So we have the major, you know, arcana, and you know, and again, it has like, you know, very cool, you know, scenes. There's runes added, you know, another added layer to this deck. But one of the cool things about this deck is that the suits feature, and I'm going to try to just get to the suits so that you can see what I'm talking about. So the suits, each suit in this deck, so here we go. So staves are wands. Each suit features sort of the same character or person in every card. So you can see here in the 2 of wands, and then this gentleman again in the 3 of the wands, and here he is again. So this deck is really cool because now you have a storyline for each of the suits. So now you can kind of narrate your own story for each of these characters that we see in the suit. So they're in different situations. You're like literally living, you know, a week or so in their life, or, you know, or something. As we know, the minor arcana is really about those daily experiences, you know, those minor, you know, everyday, you know, things and situations that we go through. And so this is like, you know, I find it, you know, pretty cool that the creator, you know, decided to like, so each suit's gonna have its own person, character living through this, you know, their daily life. So I thought that that's like really cool and a really interesting way, you know, of doing this. So yeah, so I'm just trying to get to the next suit. Okay, so here we have horns, which is cups. So here we have the ace, and now we have a new character. And so the character is this lovely Viking maiden here. So yeah, so this deck, again, it's Norse themed, it's Viking sort of themed, but to me, it's also super modern. Like, I don't know if that like makes any sense, but I get a very modern feel from it. But you can see this character is now living through the suit of cups, you know. So traditional, it's pretty traditional like RWS, but I really love the way the creator has, you know, created these storylines. It's almost like watching a TV show, and this is a character, and now you're working through their storyline. So again, we're narrating the tarot. We're giving them, you know, we're putting our own spin on it, using our intuition, trying to figure out, right, what's going on in this card, what's happening, how can I take the lessons from the story I've created and now apply them to my own life or my client's life or my friends, whatever you're doing the reading for. You know, if you're just doing general readings. So now we have this fella. So he's the swords, axes or swords. And so yeah, so now he's I love this card, the 5. So yeah, so again, a really unique, you know, kind of take on the suits, and really excellent for storytelling. And this deck is like a really super like well produced deck. The cardstock I love. It's like that matte cardstock. It makes that like amazing sound. So yeah, so it's a really cool deck, and again, really cool for you know, journeying and storytelling and creating that narrative. That's the Odins Playbook Tarot. Okay, so another sort of niche type deck is the Dark Mansion Tarot. So this, again, not exactly storybook, although it could kind of be considered, you know, have that storybook feel, but it's definitely tells a story. So, you know, this one is obviously set in a it's a very different setting than the Forest of Enchantment or the John Bauer Tarot. This is more, you know, Gothic, like set in a Gothic Victorian mansion and the surrounding villages, you know, but it's still super illustrated. It has a lot of character because the people in the deck have a lot of character, the creatures, you know, animals. Sorry about that. I just got a package and they rang my doorbell. But like I was saying, this has a very specific feel. You know, definitely tells a story. There's certainly, you know, enough in the images, you know, for you to get in there and really like dive in and come up with a story for this world. But it's a very fun world, you know, to be in. I think it's, you know, it definitely has a very specific feel to it, you know, as we know this deck. I always see people like, what should I pair with this deck? I always see people asking, like, does anyone have good ideas to pair, you know, for oracle decks to pair? And I don't know that I've ever found one really that pairs with this deck, because to me this deck just has its own very unique voice. You know, but it's really cool, and like, and again, I love the colors in this. The saturation in this deck is like amazing. The cardstock it's on, it just really allows for like the colors to come through. So it's just a really wonderful deck to use in general. But in terms of a deck that tells a story, it definitely tells a story. You know, this one has, again, like I said, it's like a Victorian mansion, Gothic mansion, and the surrounding village. Like, that's to me where this takes place. And all of these people are part of the story. And all of them, you know, have their own story, and it's kind of up to us to bring that to life and to really come up with, you know, their storyline, and, you know, there's the situations that they're in, what they're going through, and how that relates to the meaning of the cards, and how that's going to relate to our reading and our life. Again, that's really what it's about, is how we can use it, you know, as a tool. So yes, the Dark Mansion, definitely a deck that tells a story. The next deck is the Tarot of the Abyss. And so here we have like a very, you know, again, something different, you know, but definitely falls for me in the category of a deck that tells a story. And I do not really gravitate towards black and white decks, monochromatic decks. You know, I have a few, you know, that I kind of love. This is one of them. This is the only, I think the only black and white deck that I own. And it's really hats off to Anatorian and just her amazing ability to bring color and life and depth to a black and white deck. So whereas this deck is created in black and white, you know, it's pen and ink type of drawings, I see the color in this deck. And again, the depth in this deck is absolutely amazing. The feeling, the emotion. We don't need color in the deck to glean the feeling, like I said, the depth of emotion in this deck. So this is definitely a deck that tells a story. Even if it's telling it in black and white, you can still feel the color. And like I said, it's hats off to her for creating such an expressive and deep and emotional deck in black and white. And it still amazes me. It's just a gorgeous, it still amazes me that this is mass market. Like I'm just amazed, because I feel like it's such a treasure, and it's definitely a deck that tells a story. You know, you can feel the emotions. At least for me, when I see these cards, I feel the emotion coming off of these people, these characters, you know, that are featured in the cards. And that really helps to create a narrative, you know, with this deck. And when you're doing readings, you know, stepping into this world is almost like, you know, I don't know, it's like stepping into maybe like a black and white comic or graphic novel. It's not like graphic novel type art. It's like hard to explain because they're drawings. It's like, it's like stepping into someone's sketchbook. That's what I'm thinking. It's like stepping into someone's sketchbook. Like, it's open on the table. It's open to, you know, one of these images. And, you know, you're just pulled in immediately. You're pulled into these cards. And like I said, I love color. I love, you know, the decks that I've shown, they've all been colorful and illustrated. But this deck just, I don't know if it's because it's black and white, it adds this layer to it, but it is like stepping into someone's sketchbook. And then, you know, you just go from there. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck, this King of Wands. The energy, right? So in our minds, we can picture that fire is like this fiery orange and reds, and like it's got, you know, this bright, like, and you can, but like you can still, in my mind, I can see that. And I know that there's people who've added color to this deck, and I think that that's a really great idea. I would never do it because I would feel like I would ruin it, because I probably would ruin it. But in my mind's eye, I can see that. There's even if there's no color, I can feel the energy coming off of this card. And like I said, it's to Anna Torian's credit, because she's just a master at what she does. And like I said, this deck is expressive, and it is telling its own unique story. Definitely. It has its own unique voice, and you definitely can step into these cards and into this black and white world, and you'll add color. You know, you'll just add color in your mind. So yeah, it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. And like I said, it's different. It's a black and white deck, but it is definitely telling a story. All right, so next up we have a few modern decks. So if the storybook thing is not your thing, if that very like fantasy forest, you know, Little Red Riding Hood, you know, type of vibe is not your thing, and you want to narrate the tarot but with something a little more modern, this is the Super Lunaris tarot. I adore this deck. I really don't. I feel like it's extremely underrated. I don't hear about it as much as I should. I do hear about it, but I don't think as much as I should. But this deck is gorgeous. Not only is it gorgeously produced, like it's a lovely, like the cardstock is lovely, the edges are lovely, but you know, the art is, again, expressive, and you know, can definitely feel the emotion coming off of the characters. It's very diverse. It's you know, it's a world you can believe living in. It's a modern world you can see yourself living in, at least for me. And this may not make any sense, but to me, this deck reminds me of like a post-apocalyptic world. And again, this may be my extreme imagination like running away with me, or the fact that we're talking about storytelling and narrating and things, but to me, I see almost like a post-apocalyptic world where like some of the people and scenes feel like it could have been like thousands of years ago, and some of them feel like it can be the future, like 50 years from now, and some of it feels like now. So like, I don't know if I'm explaining that or like saying it the right way, but to me, that's what it feels like. It feels like this sort of like post-apocalyptic world where like people are struggling to like rebuild, or like they're loving the fact that we've gone thousands of years back to a more simple time. And so like that's what I get from this deck. So like building a story and narrating this tarot deck to me is like really interesting and really cool. And every time I pull this deck out to read with it, those are the vibes I get. You know, like countries are gone, borders are gone, there's like all different, like maps have been completely redrawn, like this is the king of like a new nation that has been developed after this, like some kind of like apocalypse. So yeah, so that's me. I'm already doing it. I'm not even like pulling out to read with this card, and I've already created a story about, you know, that new king. So yeah, so I love this deck. It's gorgeous. It's, like I said, it's timely, and it's sort of timeless, if that makes sense. If you can see, like this guy, he's wearing like a Viking helmet. Like, is this the like group of people that are like living in the mountains somewhere, like in like Europe, in like a Scandinavian country that like escaped most of the fallout from the apocalypse? Yeah, I don't know. I'm just making things up, but it, like, that's what I mean about this feeling of like being in a different time and place. Like every card's like a different like time and place. So I feel like the opportunities are endless, you know, for narrating this tarot deck, because you can really sort of like build stories for all of these people, because they're all like really different landscapes and just different places, and yeah. So talking about using your senses and kind of like getting into the card and like, what does it smell like? What does it feel like? What am I hearing? You know, what's the temperature of where I am? This is like a great deck for that. And it's super expressive, and yeah, it's a beautiful deck. It's telling its own story. For me, it's a post-apocalyptic world story, and I'm here for it. And like, I just feel like a novel should be written about these people, and their world that they're living in right now. Because I feel like it's this different world from us right now, but yet it feels somewhat the same. So yeah, so that is the Super Lunaris Tarot, a deck that tells a modern like story. And next up, we have a deck that everyone is familiar with. You either love it or you hate it. I feel like there's really no in between. This is the Sears Tarot. I happen to love this deck. I know there's a lot of people who, have a lot of opinions about this deck, but in terms of it being beautifully illustrated, that's a no-brainer. It is beautifully illustrated. It definitely has a younger vibe feel. It's got that bohemian feel. We know it's very boho. I forget who said it. Somebody on Tarot YouTube said it, and I can't unsee it and unhear it now, but it's like you feel like you're at Coachella, and that's perfectly describes this deck. I actually laughed quite a bit after hearing that because it's true. But just because it skews kind of young doesn't mean that we can discount this deck because it has a young vibe. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. The images are beautiful. It's diverse. It's diverse, and yes, I know it's not age diverse, but it's diverse in that there's different types and kinds of people, and they're in very, it's very illustrated. So like this scene right here, there's so much that you can make up, like why is he running? If that's his motorcycle, he's running towards is he like about to hop on the motorcycle and take off and chase somebody? Is he running away from somebody? Is he going to help? Like, did he just do something really bad? Like, there's so many things that, questions. And like, I feel like those questions that you ask yourself, and then once you start narrating, say, okay, this is it. This is what I think is happening. That's your intuition. Now you're like, you're keying into that intuitive aspect. And for me, creating a story really helps me with that. And I'm not saying it's going to help everyone. I'm not saying that, it's really for everyone, but for me, that's definitely sparks my intuition, like coming up with that story. Like, okay, what's going on in this card? Like, really looking at it. And I know sometimes you just want to pull one card, and that's what like knowing your tarot card meanings is for. When you pull one card, you can kind of get the message from it. You kind of be like, all right, I'm not talking about card a day. We're not talking about one card a day now telling a story, because, if I did that, I'd be late for work. I'd be sitting here, creating a 3-hour, novelization about what's happening in this one card and what's going to happen after and what's been happening before. And like, so no, I'm definitely not talking about that. But, for when you're sitting down and doing a deep spread, or, a spread that you have time to sort of reflect, get into the cards, and create that story. And Sears it's great for that. Again, it's modern. So like, if you don't like that, like in the past, like Middle Ages, medieval, whatever you want to call it, type energy and theme for your deck, then this is definitely more of a modern feel. It definitely skews a little bit younger, but it doesn't stop me from using it. I love it. I can relate to it. I definitely relate to the emotions that come up in these cards, and I can see a younger self in a lot of these cards. So that's kind of nice too. But I think it's a wonderful deck, and I think it definitely has a story, and it definitely has a clear, loud voice, because it's made such an impact on the tarot world. I mean, like I said, this deck, you either love it or you hate it. And I know a lot of people who love it, and a lot of people who use this like every day as their like everyday, workhorse deck, because that's the type of deck it is. And the guidebook's amazing, the light and the shadow, that's an amazing part of this deck. And like I said, it definitely has made a huge impact on the tarot world. And I definitely enjoy it for telling a story, for its own story and its own voice, and that modern spin. Maybe we are going to Coachella, but it'll be a great story. Okay, so just 2 more decks. This one is, definitely along more the vein of the pop culture type decks. And I feel like with pop culture, with well-known characters and things like that, it adds a different layer to narrating the tarot, because in these types of decks, you sort of already know the characters' stories. You know these already because you're familiar with them. So this is the Game of Thrones Tarot. And quite frankly, this is really the only pop culture deck that I have, and really, in my opinion, the only one that has been done properly and thoroughly, and has been done amazingly. So this one is probably one of the only ones that I own in terms of a pop culture sort of themed deck. But this deck is, if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, whether it's the books, whether it's the, the series, the TV series, then this deck is going to provide a whole different narrating experience. Because again, I said, you already know their stories. If you've watched them, if you've read the whole series, if you watch the whole series, if you've read all the books, you know what happens. We know the fate of these characters, but that doesn't mean we can't get a story, from this deck. And we can't, if anything, it's going to activate, I remember this scene. I remember what happened. I remember how I felt. I mean, if anyone who's watched Game of Thrones, you know how you felt when you watched the Red Wedding that first time. And like the horror, the disgust, I was sick to my stomach. I was nauseous. My heart was racing. I was like having a panic attack. Those types of feelings. So if you're a big fan, you don't even have to be a big fan. If you're, just someone who watched the shows, that's going to elicit emotions for you. So when you bring out this deck and start using it, you're like, oh my God, I remember that scene. Oh my God, I remember that scene. There's scenes that you cheered. I'm sure there's scenes that you cried. If you're anything like me, I cry, I cheer, I say, what the fuck just happened? Like, I like literally out loud exclaim things when I'm watching shows that I'm super into. So this series, is basically, this deck is, like I said, probably the only acceptable pop culture, deck that I've seen. I'm sure there's some out there, but for me, what I've seen, this is it. And this is the linen cardstock. It's really nice, this deck. But again, it has a story, and we kind of know what that story is, but that doesn't mean you still can't get into the cards and get lessons, because, they took a tarot deck and they took the meanings and they did one hell of a job matching up, the characters and the scenes and, the themes and these storylines for these characters, match the cards perfectly. And so I feel like it helps to get so much, when you're doing readings with a deck like this, you can get so much from it because of the stories this has already told. So more so that like this deck that tells a story, it's already told, and it's going to keep on telling because we already know the outcomes a lot of these stories. But it doesn't mean there isn't lessons to be taken away, obviously, from this deck. And I feel like getting into this world and getting, with these characters and looking at the cards and then taking the meanings of the cards that and then trying to, kind of like take the scene from the show or the scene from the book and then putting it together and kind of coming up with your own, interpretation of it, this is narrating the tarot. And this is like literally narrating the tarot because it's based on a series of books and a TV show that many people love, and, many characters that you love, many characters that you hate, many characters that you cry over and you cheer for. And so I feel like that in itself, like, it makes it such an awesome deck, such a wonderful deck to tell a story. So that's the Game of Thrones. It's amazing. Like I said, one of the only pop culture decks that I have. Okay, so the last deck is the Lord of the Rings Tarot. This is a deck that is available on Etsy. I will definitely try to link the Etsy shop in the description box, but this is the Lord of the Rings Tarot. So again, this is a deck that, just like the Game of Thrones, it's a pop culture. Again, to me, this is, one of the better, decks that have been created. I'm a huge Tolkien fan, just like many of you. And so, it was really important to sort of get this right. And I think they really, for the most part, the creator really got this right. But this is, again, a world that a world that you love, characters that you love, the emotion that comes from, like, I don't know about anyone else, but like, when I saw these movies for the first time, I saw them like 3 times in the theater. Like, I just had to keep going back because I was like, I missed stuff. I know I did. And, the emotions that come up, and just, again, we already know the stories, that these cards represent. We can quote the scenes. We can, what I mean? We know what's going to happen before and after these scenes, but it still doesn't mean we can't get into this world. So many of us have gotten into this world by reading the books or just from watching the movies, back to back to back. You're in that world all day long if you're doing a marathon, screening of the Lord of the Rings movies. So it's definitely a deck that's continues to tell a story. The lessons that these characters go through, they're they're timeless. These stories are timeless, and the lessons that we get from them, and just the emotions and the, you know, just everything that they have to teach us. Like this type of deck, you know, is a deck that's continuing to tell a story. So anything that's like this type of pop culture deck, I feel like is definitely one that you can use in this way, in this narrating the tarot. Even though you may know the stories already, you can, there's a lot of layers, you know, to these characters, you know. These are major, you know, major stories, and they definitely have a lot of lessons for us. So I feel like, you know, even though you can't really get in there and make up your own story, although you could, you know, and you know the outcome of so many of these, you know, these scenes, and what's going to happen with so many of these characters, it's still, again, you can get a lot from using this deck, because you're using that added layer of knowing the story and knowing the characters and being like, oh, this makes sense, you know, and what happened in this scene. Oh wait, I remember now. Like, I remember that scene, and you know, and then you can take away what was being felt and what was being expressed in that scene, and you can apply it to your reading. So it's just another way to use a deck in like a storytelling type fashion. So that's it for the decks I have to share. I have one honorable mention, and I'm not going to take the deck out and flip through, but another modern, really wonderful deck to use for storytelling in a very modern, very everyday, very everyman, very relatable way is the Everyday Enchantment Tarot. Finding magic in the midst of life. It literally kind of speaks for itself, but it's a wonderful deck that really, you know, embodies, you know, our everyday living in this modern, you know, day world, and it really is a deck that you can take and tell a story with, because there's so much going on in the scenes and so many characters and just so many situations. You definitely can tell stories with this deck, but I just wanted to give that as an honorable mention. And that's Poppy Palin, of course, the Everyday Enchantment. So I hope that you enjoyed this very long video, but I really did want to share decks that tell a story, and how I use them, and just what a big part of my practice is, and how I get excited about using decks in this way. And I hope that I will continue this series, and I'm going to kind of bring decks in one at a time, and really do some pulls and spreads, and kind of talk about how I, you know, storytell and getting meaning from the cards. So I hope you will join me for those, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you like the content I'm making, or if you just want to be a very nice person, please like this video and please subscribe. And I will see you all soon in the next video. Bye.